probably around 166, I think, or 167, somewhere around there. So
sorry.
That's okay. Oh, man. And we've got Salazar and Victor in the chats already.
All right.
So it's good stuff there. Should we jump in and then jump into the topic?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Okay. We're gonna do exercise, but remember, like, one sentence, 15 seconds. And I've got my where is it? I've got this banner. So that's gonna show up. Okay. For me, I ran 4 times last week. I ran today. I've been doing push-ups every day. So, and then I'm on week 2 of intermittent fasting, and I'm down 3 pounds.
Sweet.
So, how about you, Josh?
So I've managed to keep the extra like lifts that I was aiming for, and stayed consistent with that every other day. And then I've been doing the rowing machine with like 10 extra rows every night. And then I have gotten to the point where I can do 3 free hangs on the pull-up bar that are 20 seconds each, which is surprisingly hard. So I am very slowly easing into that, but I like that workout. It's good. It's painful.
Free hang fixed arm or flex?
Just fixed at this point. I'm not even close to flexed. So we'll see.
I'm excited for you to get there because I've been doing some fun stuff. Anyway, Scott, how about you for exercise?
Yeah, so still jogging about 5 miles every day and doing like the rowing machine probably about 5 out of the 7 days. Let's see, but I just haven't been eating right. So I weighed myself today. It was like, more than I've been in a little while. So I guess I gotta start eating better. It's not like I'm eating crazy like fast food and all this kind of stuff, but it's just, I don't know. It sucks.
Yeah. Just don't let yourself go to the point where I am, because right now I'm doing 2 meal replacement shakes and a salad.
I don't want to do that. No.
I should be down a lot more weight in my mind based on the crap hoops I'm jumping through right now. But anyway, okay. How about and I wanted to show this. If you go on, let's see, where is it? If you go on Design Cuts right now, like designcuts.com right now.
Yeah, you don't have to type in all that other stuff.
Yeah, you can. I'll edit this. Let's do that. You just go to the front page and scroll down just a little bit. This is super cool. It's not editing it out. Anyway, right here in the upper left-hand corner, the #1 most popular thing that's going on right now on designcuts.com is Scott's Comic Maker Toolkit, which is awesome. It's on sale on the already too low of a price of $25 or $17. And that's pretty rad. So, I mean, that's a big site. That's a huge deal. So that's congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, you could keep scrolling down and see all the products on there. I'm just blown away that it's where it is. And it's been up there for about a week. So, and I've kind of watched it and I've seen some of the other products kind of move up and down and stuff over there, but I've never even had a product that trended at all on there. And I've got 5 other products on there. So this is kind of cool.
Yeah, and the algorithm on that is not like a rigged algorithm. It's just based specifically on what is being visited and purchased the most. So like that's a huge deal. And speaking of huge deals, like not to be corny or anything, but that $17 is going to change.
Yeah, it won't be any cheaper than that. I can guarantee you because I talked to some people and they told me that I wasn't charging enough for the regular price.
Yeah.
So I've already emailed Design Cuts telling them that I need to raise the price, the regular price. But as far as the sale goes, I forgot how many. It's probably a ticker on the top there that'll say how much longer the sale is for. But it'll be 17 until that sale goes away. So.
And what's cool if this thing's really starts trending is I'm imagining we're going to start seeing a lot of like indie comics like start to use your toolkit.
Yeah. So it's like 4 days left for that deal.
So this is like a really huge deal, but like if you guys want in on it for that price, I recommend go get it. Scott put a ton of work into it, and it's just full. I mean, as you can see, it's full of like a million awesome things, and I'm stoked for you, man. I think it seems well earned and well deserved. So yeah.
Scott says he's picking one up. Yeah, tell me what you think about it, Scott. Yeah, and if anyone does get it and uses it, definitely hashtag me in it, or just let me know. I want to see what people are doing with all the stuff in there. So
yeah, how cool would that be if you start like every once in a while you're like reading Marvel comic and you're like, that's my font.
yeah, that'd be awesome.
Well, you never know. I mean, like, I'm sure that's what happened with Blambot. I don't think that was like a giant foundry or anything. So
no, Blambot's fantastic too.
Yeah,
I like their stuff a lot.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to do, but I don't just want to do fun. I want to do everything. I want to be like a source where you can get like all kinds of stuff for comics, making comics, not just fonts or not just brushes, but pretty much everything. So I got a long way to go. I'm working on a font, but when we get to our thing, I can show you the next product I'm working on. But I just want to keep on putting out products for comic book makers. So
cool.
I love it.
That's awesome.
It's amazing.
Good stuff. Okay, so let's jump into the art check here. Should I start?
Sure.
Oh, my screen just went away. Hold on a sec. Go here, and then share. All right. So I designed and animated. So that was my plan. Is I had the front view from before, so I already had this view of him waving, and so I had to design him from the side. And so here he is from the side, all articulated and rigged up. His wings flutter, his foot bounces, he draws. So this is all looping, so that I can come in and change what I want when I want. And then I also came in and got him in a walk cycle, which was significantly more complicated than I thought it would be, because I didn't think through everything all the way. And so what actually ended up happening was his pelvis wasn't rotating with his legs. And since I had him at a 3/4 view instead of a pure profile view, that was pretty complicated. And so if you look, you can see that his belt and his belt loops and the zipper and the pocket and the outside are all shape tweening with the rest of his legs. And so just those two things were probably, I don't know, 15 hours of work, I think. But yeah, so I'm pretty excited about it. And you can see, like, I don't know if this will play all the way through, but I've got kind of like some detail here. And so I've got a video up on YouTube and IGTV that'll show kind of my process going through that. I was using Edward Muybridge as kind of a basis. He did like locomotion of animals, and so he has all these like still shots of people walking and stuff. So I found a toddler walking, and then I mapped the same movement and timing over those photographs. So, and then awesome. It's a little weird to do a 4-armed creature walking.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to do it like just mirror and have everything look really rigid. And so I offset them and then animated them slightly differently. And I figured like the lower set of arms would swing wider and the higher set of arms would be tighter to the chest. And so I was really trying to like think it all through and everything. But anyway, overall, that's what I got done. Pretty excited about it.
That's so rad. And these are all rigged too. So like, I think the thing that I love about seeing each step of this process is like for animation alone, it's very impressive. And by the way, like just a little detail of his hand kind of curling like while he's drawing is just his left little like curly bop arm hand.
Right.
I love that. But yeah, I mean, so it's really impressive if this were just traditional, but the fact that it's rigged in that short of amount of time is really impressive, because I think once people see all these things kind of plugged into the full scope of what you're creating, it's going to be pretty mind-blowing, I think, what you're able to do. So that's I don't know, I'm really excited about what you're exploring here, you know.
Yeah, thanks. I'm pretty excited about it. I thought I was underestimating the amount of time that it would take, but anyway, I'm about on par. But it is a ton of work. But yeah, they're all rigged. So I'm using rubber hose for the arms, and so each one of those has a control. So like normally, I would have to like rotate the forearm and then rotate the upper arm, move those around. But with rubber hose, once you get it set up correctly, you can just grab the wrist and pull it. And so you just animate the controls, and it knows where the joint and articulation points are and everything. And so getting it set up is really labor intensive, but once it's set up, animating it after the fact is not, which is why I think it's why it takes me, I spend about 70% of my time designing and rigging and about 30% of my time actually throwing keyframes down. So
Love it.
I don't know. I might be way off. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making this up as I go along, but it's fun. So
Cool.
yeah. So Josh, how about you? What have you gotten done?
Okay, so my internet crapped out for a second, so I gotta reset up the screen share.
While you're doing that,
Oh, here we go.
Scott, I believe it's Scott, because I'd rather be drawing as two people.
Yeah, he did say it was Scott.
Yeah, he's the one that usually comments. He said he used the font from Starter Kit for my Werewolves and Unicorn story, and people loved it. So so that's another.
Yeah, this one's got a lot more, and even like the standard font, the bullpen banter font that is included in the comic Starter Kit. This one also has a bold and italic version of that, plus other fonts that aren't in the Starter Kit. And it's got most of the stuff in the Starter Kit. Even if you already have the Starter Kit, there are like a couple of things. There's some different sound effects in the Starter Kit and one font that's not in this. So you probably, if you can, you want to get both. But this has most of the stuff in the Starter Kit, but like tons more. So
yeah, and I mean, fonts alone for comics, you can run up.
Oh yeah, if you put a comic craft,
$30 easy for one font.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, for professionally made fonts, like $35 just for the font is usually a fairly decent deal, because some of them run upwards of like 75 to plus, just, and that's not a font family. That's just a font.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the fact that it's got that plus all of the other things and everything is pretty crazy. So
Salazar said he wants it so bad he's waiting for some money to come in. So that's cool.
I hope some money comes on in the next 5 days or so, 4 days, because
it's still on sale.
The sale's going to be over, unfortunately.
But even at full price, it's a crazy good deal. So.
And then he actually very kindly, Salazar, remembered that we were going to talk about separating the art from the artist, which we actually did remember, but we asked people to remind us this episode, and so that's really cool. I'm glad our community is like actually sticking to it and holding us to it. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, Josh, what did you get done?
All right, so I got the panels that I wanted to have penciled completed right here. So these three, and then I got halfway through this, and I'm going to try to get the other character worked out tonight, and then probably fill in the background like the day after, which is going to have a little bit more of a crowd and stuff. So it's kind of a weird page, but it's super fun to work on. So
cool. Yeah, it looks great. I like it. Scott, how about you? What have you gotten done in the last little bit?
Let's see. Let me share a screen here. Okay. All right. So I just uploaded a new video. Why is getting paid for art so important? And I'm not sure if people are like watching the video or they're just reading the title, but the whole video is basically about how I think people in the beginning are focusing too much on trying to get paid when those beginning clients aren't the best at all, really. So my kind of solution to that is just kind of, even if you got a regular job or whatever, concentrate on your stuff and get it to a, and work on your craft on the side, so you don't have to do some of these really bad projects, and then eventually people will come to you for the stuff you're looking for. But so I'm getting some weird feedback, to pay bills and get a roof over your head and stuff like that. And like, yeah, I'm really getting the point. But so anyway, I uploaded that video. Let's see, I worked on some B-roll for this new comic making series that I'm working on, prepping and working on some outlines for that. Also some sort of props for some new stuff I'm doing with the channel. I'm working on some sketches. Marshall and I are going to do another round of Take Me to Your Leader Tuesday. So I'm working on some sketches to get in the can for that. There's freelance stuff, and I'm also working on a new font, which I'll show here. So this is the next sort of project I'm working on. This will be a font, basically two fonts in one, freezer burn. So it's going to have like a hot and a cold version, and so that's the new thing I'm working on. So
that's great.
Yeah, it'll be a while before that's done, because not only do you, with the these digital products, not only do you have to create the actual font, the actual files and everything, you have to create all the product images, and sometimes those take as long as the product, because they really want you to like sell it and show what all is included and stuff like that. So it's a little ways off, but that's coming soon. So
cool. That's awesome. That was all three of us. Okay, so as far as challenges go, for me, weird sleep schedule is weird. So I'm still doing the wake up at noon and go to bed at 4 a.m. except, as always happens, like it's like drifting, and so like Saturday night I went to bed at 5:30 a.m. And then I had church at 9 a.m. the next morning. And so like last night I was back to like 5 a.m. So I'm trying to get back to 4 a.m. because that's the best thing for me. But that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is that. And then just my prepubescent 9-year-old that seems to think that she's 12. And we just have drama, lots of drama. So yeah, anyway, so I'm hoping she's getting it all out of her system now, so that we can. I'm hoping this isn't like a prelude to things to come, but we'll see. She's a strong-willed girl, which is going to serve her well once she moves out of my house. How about you guys? Challenges.
So for me, we did a trip to the local fair in the Antelope Valley, and which we were relieved to find out that there was like a reporting of like a sheriff getting shot in Lancaster, and I was relieved and horrified to find out the whole thing was a hoax by the sheriff. And it had gotten to the point where the mayor was like raving against the mentally ill and stuff. And it turns out the sheriff just made it up. So anyhow, that was a relief. That made the fair a little more fun. Knowing that was there wasn't like a weird sniper running around. But it was super fun, and my kid had fun. But because it's like, California, and we were having record heat, so it was like 110. That made it a little less fun and a little more exhausting. But Ben had fun, and I still managed to get my comics done and my working out and stuff done, and so it's a good challenge. But there's that, and just in the thick of it, kind of working. So that's pretty much the big challenges.
Cool. Scott, challenges for you.
My biggest challenge right now is just my kids are back in school. My son's in college and he doesn't have his license yet, so trying to get him to get his license, but also until then having to take him to school, and it's just taking a lot out of my day. So So yeah, I'm trying to figure all that out, whether if I go wait for him at school, go to Starbucks and try to work on some stuff there, but I'm kind of limited to what I can do at a Starbucks. So yeah, so that's kind of a challenge. And just the other, challenge I've got a client that everyone knows this story, but they just haven't paid me and they keep dragging their feet on stuff. And, finally I started sending them, notices that, I kind of had to change my tone and send notices that, the price is going up, which it should have went up anyway, because the percentage wise, because according to the contract, every month it goes up 10%, but I hadn't really been doing that yet because it was something where they were, the project wasn't totally finished. It was like 99% done and we were waiting on feedback, and then they just drug their feet after that. But you can't do that. It's like, so anyway, so I don't know what's going to happen with that, but anyway, that always sucks. But yeah, so those are my challenges.
Yeah.
There's a few things that committees kill. One is design, and the other is timely paychecks.
Yeah, this is one of those things where all the feedback that they gave me was like, oh yeah, it's great, and then you turn in the final thing, and it's like they put it in front of some committee, and then after that, it's just like, so
yeah.
But everything. The contract is pretty ironclad, so I just don't really want to go to court over it. But.
Right, and you got money up front, so
yeah, I could get some. Yeah, I've got a third, so
right, which is it's never cool to have to console yourself with that, but it's always better than like, oh, why did I work without a contract?
Yeah, you Scott did the video about why artists, why is getting paid so important, but obviously if you're doing work for pay and there's a negotiated fee, you should get that fee. You should get that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Victor was asking for having a guest on Artcasters. I am still working that out. I had one that I thought was slightly locked in. I thought it would be cool because college illustration teacher, but they actually just found out that they have Thursday classes that overlap with it. So now I am trying to rebook, so I will get back to you guys on that. Cool. But we usually have a guest, so we'll see if we can make it happen.
Awesome. And the best way to stay involved in that is to get on that email newsletter.
Exactly.
Okay, so for plans for me, I've got let's see, today is Monday, so I'm going to design, my main character has like a fly larva thing that's going to act like a cat, so I'm going to design that. I actually already got half of this done. Design the studio background, and then design the booth that he's going to be selling at. And so I've got some design things, luckily no rigging. So all that's today. And then I've got to design the money asset, and then I'm going to design a city street and an office, and then a theater sign by Wednesday. And then I have to start working on this giant crowd scene, which I will get done by Thursday. So
am I nuts, or did you get a lot of the kind of frog, like the whole eating your frog early? It seems like you got some of the more complicated stuff done earlier.
Yeah, but that's the stuff I enjoy. So a lot of this stuff is like, if I were to eat the frog, like do the stuff that I don't like first, I would have done this crowd scene first. But I actually needed a bunch of the characters done, which I like rigging characters and designing characters. And so, but I have, let me see. Yeah, I have all of the characters for this animation rigged, and half of them animated without the backgrounds and without interacting with each other. So now I'm just doing backgrounds, props, timing, and then cleanup animation. And depending on how long that crowd scene takes, I might actually get done a week early, maybe 3 days early. So we'll see. I was shooting to get it done in 28 days. If I can get it done in 25, that'd be kind of cool. So
that's insane. It's so cool. Keep up, keep doing it, because you're keeping pace with a pretty impressive schedule for. An animation house a lot of the time would have trouble keeping that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, well, there's shortcuts that I'm taking, but yeah, it's aggressive. It's an aggressive schedule. I'm off right now, and so I'm able to put in 4 to 6 hours a day on it. So it's still faster than I could have done it before. But yeah, so we lost Josh there for a second.
Yeah. Time Warner is my best friend. So if anybody wants to send them hate mail, I'm not saying they should, but I wouldn't be against it.
Okay.
So
plans for you?
All right. So my plans are I'd like to finish penciling the rough pencils for this panel, this wide panel, and at least maybe have a head start at the beginning of the rough pencils for the last panel. I also have a more long-term thing that's a definite set in stone plan, which is September 21st at the American Legion. My band is playing along with a bunch of other bands at Summer's Gone Fest, which is a big all-day event at the American Legion in Lancaster. So if you guys can check that out, September 21st. And I think it's only like $4 or $8 or something like that. So should be fun. Lots of drinks and rock and roll. And then other than that, I'm basically I'm just kind of trying to start scoping out my plan a little bit, but without kind of overthinking it. Just start doing some of the pre-thinking for what to do once I'm done with the last page. So, I have some pretty immediate things. Like I know I have to do the end pages and the jacket design and stuff like that. And that's kind of what I want to focus on. I want to actually get a proof before I even design a Kickstarter campaign, because I want to make sure that whoever I run through, like if I go through Kindle Direct, I want to make sure I'm not giving people something that might be an inferior product or something. And I also want to work out all the kinks, like if there's anything wrong with the design. I don't want to find that out the day I have to ship out orders to people.
Right.
So I'd rather get that all done early. But as for like press and stuff like that, and just like an attack plan and a game plan, I'm starting to brew ideas. So that's something I'd like to have a clearer idea of. Not too clear though, because I don't want to jump to the finish line before I'm at it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, totally. Scott, how about you for plans?
I am going to continue working on this font, and I might do, like I said, I got to try to do some work at a coffee shop, which is basically I'm limited to just sketching. So I might try to, sketch some additional fonts that I will get to later, just kind of get a head start on that. And I got to start working on some promotions and stuff for the Comic Maker Toolkit, because in 4 days I'll be able to put it on other sites. I'll probably wait till next week, because I think there's a certain day that's better for like putting stuff on Creative Market or whatever, and on my own site. And then do some stuff on Pinterest. And Josh told me I should, which I don't know why I didn't think of that, but I should be sharing this on social media and stuff like that, especially because it's kind of trending, and that's on Design Cuts, and that's kind of a cool thing. So I need to start doing some stuff for that. So just get the word out, ride this momentum, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Capitalize on it, because it can roll, into this self-perpetuating thing, which would be awesome.
Yeah, hope so. That'd be nice.
I forgot to mention that the client that I was working with has kind of greenlit projects, and I'll be doing dual animations at the same time. So, yeah, and I'll have to talk. I might talk to you guys off air about some details on that. But yeah. So, all right. I forgot we left it on Scott here. There we go. So should we jump into our topic?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So today's topic is, can you separate the art from the artist? AKA, should you separate the art from the artist? AKA, this is probably a nuanced discussion because I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. So here's let me set it up. Right? So let's say that you really like a book, and then you find out that the author of that book holds a belief that is offensive to you. Does that become a problem for your enjoyment of that book? And then let me ask you this. Does it make a difference if the author is still alive or if it is an older work? And the reason I bring that up is you go back far enough and many beloved things came from people who were really horrible individuals. By today's standards. And some of them are really horrible individuals by their own day's standards. Take, for example, Walt Disney, who did a lot of really incredible things and also was quite racist and had weird beliefs. You look at like Warner Brothers and a lot of the propaganda pieces that they did, and they do not hold up today in a good light, versus something that someone is currently in the process of working on volume 2. Is there a difference there? Does the art stand on its own? Does your support of that art going to the artist, if they're still alive, come into play? Can you or should you separate the art from the artist? I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's the topic. It's like there's so many different aspects of it. I'm curious to have this discussion because I do not have a clearly held opinion on it. I'm kind of two minds. I think I straddle the fence on this one, and I take it like situation by situation.
Yeah.
So
I don't know that I have a clear opinion on it either. I mean, it's in some ways there's, and it might, I never really thought about the time angle, or like, cause like there's, take like H.P. Lovecraft, definitely not, a lot of bad things that guy believed in. But I'm not, I've never really been a fan of his, or I've never really got into his work. I mean, I know what his stuff's all about, and I know I know the gist of it, but I've never read any of his stories because I came in late and I had actually, heard about, some of his beliefs and things like that. And that kind of drew me away from that. But there are other people that I have liked and that I learn about them and I'm like, oh man, but I still try to separate. In those cases, I try to separate it. So in some ways that may be hypocritical of me. So this is a good conversation for me because I got to kind of rethink this whole thing.
So that's interesting that you bring up the order in which you experience the work, whether you come to it from the work first or from the artist first makes a big difference. And I would agree, because no matter what you do, the experience that you have with something is going to stay with you. And so if it's soured because you come in through, the belief system that you disagree with first, or just not even a belief system, but just some things that are just out and out wrong and horrible, that's going to taint your experience with the work. But if you come with the work and you have a great experience with the work, and then after the fact you learn that like they're a Holocaust denier or something, it's like, what do you do with that? Yeah. And that kind of brings up levels of extremes, like if somebody disagrees with me politically, I mean, that's probably everyone that I meet. I'm not going to have anyone that I know that is like down the line, point by point, in agreement with me. So that's pretty low. Right. But if they're like, I think we should like imprison women, for whatever reason, I'm like, well, you're just an extreme crazy person. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's levels of severity as well that I think come into play. I don't know. What do you think, Josh?
Man, it's a hard one. And unfortunately, I'm kind of along the lines of you guys on it, where I'm not 100% on a solution to the problem of the art versus the artist, because like there's a couple things like one of my favorite, still to this day, one of my favorite writers that like clicked with me a lot when I was a young adult was J.D. Salinger. And J.D. Salinger's, I still think to this day, one of the best American writers. But then when you read about the life of J.D. Salinger, and then you read some of the stories from his exes, where he was like forcing them to like eat frozen peas because they were too fat, and like just kind of crazy misogynistic sort of activities that he was engaging in with women he was dating. It does it make the work any less good? And then because the guy was a jerk, should I write off his work? Because it feels important beyond just the author. Because I didn't know the author when I read it.
Right.
And then there's other scenarios where it's like, when you're taking art history classes and stuff, and you're like looking at art that was like, crazy sculptures of like weird gods that people used to like sacrifice things to and stuff. And they're beautiful pieces of art, but they're like, their intention is a lot darker, and like the history is a lot darker. Or like the pyramids, and like you look at the pyramid, like, is it okay to enjoy the pyramids? Like to go, like, let's say you take a trip to Egypt, is it okay to enjoy the pyramids, understanding that like some mass amount of slave labor involved in the building of those pyramids?
There's actually less slave labor than most people think, because it was a seasonal building of the pyramids, and most villages would, in their agricultural off season, donate their man hours towards building the pyramids, and they bragged about it in their histories. And so the modern assumption that it was built by like an unlimited supply of slave labor is starting to be reshaped as we learn more about the history of Egypt.
Got it.
But it is an interesting thing, right? Because does that take away from the aesthetic of it? Does it take away from the accomplishment of it? Does it take away from the, I don't know. I mean, it's a
line, right? Because like, so here's the thing. So let's say you're admiring, a beautiful chapel built in England by like a really domineering, terrible king,
right,
who was just annihilating people and murdering family members and stuff. But they commissioned this really beautiful building. Like what I'm getting at is like it's hard to know where the line is, because I think most people feel like there's a line somewhere, but it's hard to know where that is. Like, is the line at, like what's the thing that an artist can do that basically undoes their art? And I do think the idea of like living or dead is important. But then I wonder, like, why does living or dead matter?
I think because when you take the living or dead into account, I think there's two things that come into play. One of them is something that we do not like to think about because it makes us very uncomfortable thinking about it. But the other is really easy. It's that if it's public domain, or if they're no longer around or whatever, they are not directly financially benefiting from your support.
Yeah.
And so you're not directly supporting them in their other pursuits. The other one I think is a little bit stickier, and is something that when you think about it, it becomes hugely problematic in a number of ways. And so even saying it out loud in a public forum becomes kind of uncomfortable for me, because you can't really judge people by standards of now, because like, I mean, if you were to judge me by the things that I believed and said in high school, and I think this is true of most people, nobody would ever talk to me, because I was a horribly narcissistic, person, like most teenagers, right? But I've learned and grown and developed and changed and become more empathetic and understood nuance and all of that. Then in addition to that, the world has gotten significantly better. I mean, generally speaking, most people today feel like it is a horrible atrocity to own another human being. It was not that long ago. I think it was Joe Rogan was doing a comedy routine, and he's like, if you think about how long people live, we live like about 90 to 100 years. So 3 people ago, it was like 2 or 3 people ago. If you measure time by that, people just generally accepted the fact that it was okay to own another human being as property. And that's not to say that everybody was massively racist. There were definitely many people that were horrifically racist and evil, but also the world was different. And a lot of people, it takes them decades or to be confronted with something before they question what seems normal.
Yeah.
And if the entire world has normalized something that is horrific, like slavery, and you're born into that situation, and everyone that you know accepts that situation, and no one questions it, should you be judged by people 200 years later? I don't know. I mean, a little, but not to the same extent as somebody today who's like, I think black people should be slaves. You're just a horrible person. I think you should be deplatformed. I don't think you should have a public voice. I think, you're obviously, a racist, horrible, bigoted, hateful individual in 2019 when you say that.
Yeah. I think to jump in too, like I think a good example of what you're talking about, like there was this point in time where like some schools were banning Huckleberry Finn because of the fact that it used certain derogatory words that you just don't use now.
Yep.
Just kind of discounting the history of that book being super important for the social justice cause of like enslaved people. Like it was, that book was like a very progressive book when it came out. In retrospect, because people spoke in a certain way at the time it was written, and it was authentic to the time it was written, it can come across as kind of offensive, but it's not in context actually offensive. And so that's one of those things where, time doesn't treat everything equally. And when you're looking at stuff, it is, I think, important to kind of look at the time it's made in. However, I also do agree with you on the idea of like, if somebody's long passed, and their estate isn't necessarily getting a bunch of wealth, like they're just they're in the public domain, then yeah, you're purchasing that art is not necessarily supporting that person, it's just supporting that art because the art has just outlived the person.
Right.
You mentioned estate, but for instance, say if their estate, if they are passed, but they still, if their descendants are still earning something from that, and they're assuming that their descendants have
There aren't the same people
are fine. If they're in, if they've changed their, if they're not believing the same thing that their grandfather or whoever believed, if they're fine people. So I don't. That's
well, it gets gray too, because there's areas of like with the historicity of things, like if you were to say rewrite art history textbooks and take out Pablo Picasso because the guy was a jerk and a womanizer and pretty terrible human being, do the research. Like there's nobody arguing Picasso was a good dude.
Right.
The guy was just borderline creepy, possibly illegal, was really important to the history of art. So do you go back and just kind of take that person out of history to kind of right the wrong of that person getting success, and then create a false history so people just kind of forget that there was an era where like misogynist, terrible people could get that big in art,
Or
and then not learn that lesson and risk repeating it.
right. Or do you teach the holistic view of that?
Yeah.
Because most art history that I've come across do not mention his personality or personal habits.
Oh, wow. All art history classes I had got heavy into it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I think it might depend on the school and things like that. I just came across an interesting one. This will be less controversial, but B.H. Skinner, who is the one who came up with the idea of operant conditioning. There's classical conditioning and operant conditioning. He's a behavioral scientist. I recently came across like the body of his work, and I've been looking into, like, I just thought it was interesting, you know, like the idea of muscle memory, the idea of whatever. Like classical conditioning is you know, Pavlov's dog, right? You ring a bell every time you feed the dog. Eventually you ring the bell, the dog salivates, right? That's kind of an instinctive thing. Operant conditioning, B.H. Skinner's operant conditioning, is like you take a wrestler and you go through this one set of moves all the time, every time you come into this one situation, and eventually the muscle memory of that situation comes in. He actually believes wholeheartedly that human beings should be treated as things and its and others, that he calls the organism, and that societies of human beings should be considered to be superorganisms rather than individuals, and has spent a ton of time not talking or like kind of discounting the idea of the soul, and believes that free will is a complete illusion. It's like one of the most dangerous ways of thinking about humanity that I've ever come across. And it's called radical behavioralism. And he was this huge proponent of it. And it's actually his work spurred on this other guy who is widely read by people in Silicon Valley right now that are currently doing all of the behavioral data science behind the algorithms that drive social media. It's terrifying, the connection that current algorithmic programming has to this belief that people should not be thought of as individuals and have no free will and should be manipulated for the social good. And if you have the power to manipulate, then you should manipulate, because you've been put into a situation where you have the responsibility to move the public, the superorganism. And it bothers me that in my education, and I'm fairly educated, that at 39 I'm coming across this. And I've known about B.H. Skinner since I was 14.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're touching on something important that'll maybe tick off the box of like the historical stuff, because like similarly, like I remember in elementary school learning about the Pilgrims and like just, you know, being taught this really weird version of history where all the founding fathers were Christians, and like,
and everybody agreed with each other.
Become kind of a very weird kind of perception of America. And regardless of your political beliefs, you know, when you read the actual history, like you read books by Jefferson, he was by no means like a traditional Christian. Like he had his own Bible where he'd like taken out sections with miracles and taken out all of these sections and was like, I like these phrases by Jesus, and that's my Bible, that's my religion. But he was mostly a humanist. And so and then you have like a lot of the founding fathers were like straight up like humanists. Some of them were like hardcore pagans. Like and like I don't mean pagan as like the derogatory term pagan. I mean just legitimate pagans. Like they practice paganism, and it's like
which is different in the 1800s than it is today. It's
yeah. So it's kind of like and there's alternate histories that were taught like not that far from our generation of like, you know, the US coming here and like breaking bread with like, you know, the local natives, and like, and then how it has this like cookie cutter beautiful story of like cowboys versus Indians, what they used to call Native Americans. And like it it kind of wrote out a lot of the violence and the sickness and like some of the horrors of what we brought when we came here. And so it's like there's an importance, I think, on not whitewashing history and pretending things that were consequential didn't happen, or important things didn't happen, or that important people, like important ideas, weren't presented, but also including the reality of what the character of these people were, so that we're not kind of thinking that like all of the founding fathers were these perfect people, or that all of the painters in art history weren't a little creepy and weird. I mean, you know, Frida Kahlo is like hailed now as a great artist, but her husband was like he committed spousal abuse. He was a violent man. He was a violent drunk. He was a drunkard. He did all sorts of terrible things, and yet brilliant painter and really important for art history. So it's like it's important to get both sides, and I think that, to me, that's more my side on that thing, is like, yeah, look at the art without the artist and like recognize art that was good at the time, but also acknowledge if the artist was a complete lunatic, and also learn a little bit about society at the time, that they'd be willing to accept this crazy artist stuff and be like, well, they're a genius, so let them do this terrible stuff. So I think that's kind of where I land on that. I don't know. I think that's kind of where we're heading with that. By the way, behavioral science, though, don't dig too deep because it gets dark, man.
No, I know.
It gets dark. There's some dark origins to that.
Well, I mean, you look at most, I mean, you look at most psychology, and the way that we use it and perceive it today is useful and very geared towards like individual mental health, and relationships. Its origins are some of the creepiest and weirdest, like like a lot of things. But So anyway, so history comes into play. Victor's got a good comment here. Oh no, sorry, I like that one too. But this one, when I was younger, I'd idolize the artist because of the work that I liked and enjoyed. But now I just enjoy the art, and I always try to keep in mind that the artist will always be flawed. And that's something that's really interesting, that I find nuanced in an increasingly polarized online environment, is that you have to kind of take into account that everyone is flawed, and at any given time, people believe things that they will not believe once they come into contact with better reasons and better arguments and better thinking. And so, like the one thing that drives me nuts is you dig into someone's past history on Twitter or something, and you find something that they said 6 years ago that they don't even believe anymore, that they've become, a better person, and somehow you use that to attack them or whatever, or not go after their work. But the fact of the matter is that everyone is a very nuanced individual. And I was watching Anazari Aziz, his stand-up recently. He made the point of like, you know what, we're all crappy people learning as we go, and like, and that's kind of the point. That's kind of the point of a lot of this, is like, I try to do the best that I can. But I know that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I think differently than I did back then. And I would hope everybody does. I would hope that we're giving each other the opportunity to kind of evolve in our thinking as we experience more and understand, where we've made mistakes. And if somebody believes the same stuff that they believed when they were 15 in their 40s, boy, I'm very concerned because, of that. So there's that aspect of it, right? Is that people are imperfect. The other aspect of it is just the basic question of what is your experience with the work? Is your experience what you get out of the work? Is your experience what other people get out of the work? Or is your experience your relationship with the artist through the work. And it's interesting because you brought up Salinger. It's a Catcher in the Rye is a problematic book. I mean, it's awesome. And I loved it. And it really speaks to a lot of things, but it is also like the school shooters, like manifesto. And that's not to say that there's a problem with the book, but that is to say that there is something about that book that disturbed individuals relate to. And does that affect things? You know,
it's a weird thing too, because the book, because of that book in particular, has been really maligned by like censors because of the fact that it's unfortunately been in bad locations throughout history. So there's a couple people, like the guy who shot Reagan had a copy of Catcher in the Rye on him. And because of that, for like 2 years, high schools banned it. But it is interesting because it's not really a violent book. But it is kind of fascinating to think, like, to me, I think the thing that I kind of think we got to get into, since it's like we're almost at an hour, is we got to jump to current. Like, how do we deal with people who are presently alive? You know what I mean? Like, so we've kind of dealt with people in history, and I think we all would agree it's important to like really accurately present how people were, rather than kind of create a fantasy picture of what the artist was.
right.
But what about now? What about like the scenario where, like, I think of a current experience, and I'm still on the fence on this. It's like Michael Jackson and his music. And the weird thing is, like, I was pretty young when all that stuff came out about Michael Jackson, and everybody pretty much knew like what was going on.
Yeah.
And then I think society just kind of ignored it for like 10 years. And then the documentary came out where it was actually the victims as adults. Mm-hmm. And it's really brutal. It's like, it's worth watching, but it's also super brutal to watch, because it's like you are seeing the kind of the aftermath of like what that did to people's lives.
Right.
And it really sinks home. So ever since then, if I'm like walking through a grocery store, I feel kind of weird hearing Michael Jackson songs, which is crazy because I'm also the type who, like, if the Michael Jackson song comes on at like a wedding, usually it's at a wedding or something, you know, rock out to it because it's badass. It's Thriller or something.
Yeah.
Now I'm not so sure, and I'm not sure if I want to support that. And because his estate is so vested in kind of like ensuring like his innocence and like kind of denial.
Yeah.
Do I want to put more money in the coffers of that fund? Like it's a real question, because at the same time, I can't deny the music's good, you know? But it is weird because in that particular scenario, I started leaning more towards, I've always tended to lean towards like, well, the artist should be what matters. And you can't, you know, like, I love rock and roll, and if I started judging people based on behavior, I'd have to get rid of half my record collection, you know?
Right.
Yeah, I noticed, like, on the Michael Jackson, I just went and saw Weird Al Yankovic, and he didn't play either, like, Eat It or Fat. And I'm guessing that's why, because, I mean, those are two of his kind of, as far as the parody, those are two of his biggest hits. So it's kind of like, I was kind of, I didn't really think of it.
Yeah, it's just a weird one to figure out. Like, to me, in that scenario, I'm juggling with whether I'm okay with listening to it. Well, I tend to think if it's a society thing, like, I don't feel like it's my job to tell somebody what music or what books they can and can't like listen to or read. I don't want to get in that territory myself, because I feel like that's a bit of censorship.
Yeah.
But it's like, for myself as an individual, it's really a weird conundrum of like, I don't know if I'm okay with this art anymore because of the artist. And I don't know if you guys have had similar scenarios, and then if you know like what that line is. I mean, I definitely feel like that line should be like molesting little children. Like that's a pretty
Right.
big line. You know, that maybe for a living artist or an artist whose like estate is really close and vested in that and probably enabled that. Like, do I want to give it my money? It's weird, you know?
Yeah,
And
it's
is
super.
there a
It's
line
super.
like, can I still listen to Jackson 5? You know, I'd imagine so, but
Yeah, it's super interesting because does it come down to money? Because that seems to be where we're all talking right now. Is, you know, like your support of that financially benefits either a bad person or an enabler of a bad person, right? But I wonder if there's something deeper than that. For example, I'm pretty sure that if I knew more about the writers of a TV show that I really enjoy, that it would be hard for me to enjoy that TV show anymore. You know, I'm pretty sure that, you know, if I look and I'm like, oh, you know, there's this guy who's just this horrible person,
yeah,
and he wrote one of my favorite episodes of one of my favorite TV shows. Once I know that episode in my experience changes because I have new knowledge and information.
yeah,
So that's my original question is the art, you know, an experience between the viewer and the work, or is it an experience between the viewer and the artist through the work? And this is a big debate that I actually hate most of the time it comes up because it always leads into like, what is art, which is a stupid question. It always bugs me. But anyway, because when I look at it, like I have had deep experiences that have been super beneficial to me through music and movies and books that I've read without knowing anything about the original authors of those things.
yeah.
That experience, I don't feel like it should be negated if I were to find out something after the fact that is super negative. You know, I mean, if I read Joseph Conrad and I have this amazing existential experience about who I am on this planet and my purpose in life and what I should be doing, which is true. For me, I read a book of his short stories while I was on like my first really long motorcycle journey.
Yeah.
And I spent a couple weeks on the road, like reading this book and writing my thoughts and feelings about it. If I were to later find out, and I don't think this is true, but if I were to later find out that he was like some horrific individual, that wouldn't change the fact that for the last 20 years, I've had, that's an exaggeration, for the last 15 years, I've been positively impacted by coming across his work at a specific point in time in my life.
Yeah.
So that comes in, for me, that also comes into play. It's not just financial, it's the impact of the art itself.
Yeah. And I think it really is like one of those things that unfortunately is kind of gray and it has to be kind of up to the individual. But I also want to say, like, I don't think there's anything wrong. Like, I think there's real issues like we addressed at the beginning when it comes to artists in history and trying to kind of whitewash and write them out of history and kind of write history.
Yeah.
Because I think to write history to be correct is good. Like in the sense of like the weird founding fathers stories that were told in like the 50s and like what we now know, you know, like obviously we shouldn't just continue to tell like a myth. We should continue to try to, like, especially when teaching history, like focus on truth of like what actually happened. And so I think that's super important. And I think it gets into a dangerous territory if we try to kind of go back and like write out people who were massively influential from history, because it risks repeating bad things. And it also risks like complete confusion as to like cultural phenomenons. Like if you take Picasso out of art, then you're going to be like, what is this weird thing everybody started doing with painting? Why did they start doing that at that time? And you have no explanation. or a false explanation, like, oh, well, it was this other person. I do think the practice of going back and highlighting people who were written out, like I mentioned before, like Frida Kahlo, like that's important. You know, like people who weren't key figures at the time who probably should have had more, you know, Mary Shelley's a good example too. Because of the movement of like literature, that's how Frankenstein got huge. Because people looked back and were like, hey, there was this lady who was like a really good writer, and she was around a bunch of like super influential writers, but for some reason nobody really wrote about her. And like, so they you know, unearthed some of that stuff and were richer for it. So that's my point, is like, I wouldn't go into that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with now if somebody crosses a social line that's like massive, and they're currently alive and they're in the zeitgeist, like right now is the time. I don't think there's anything wrong with society being like, nope, you don't get to. You don't you don't get to, you know, make your movie. Go make it somewhere else, like that kind of thing. I think that's a fair point, especially if the line has been crossed significantly, you know.
Mhm.
But I also think like when we're making that kind of judgment, we need to make sure it was a significant crossing of the line. You know, we need to kind of define what that line is. I think that's important. Like, is it misspeaking? Is it taking something out of context? Because I think that would be overreaction. But it is interesting. But I do think for now, like in the current climate, like I think for artists who are living, at least for me, it's a lot easier for me to separate the art from the artist. Because like in the case of Salinger, I feel like that book is so important to like English literature, to entire movements. Like I think if somebody isn't familiar with it and then they go see like 5 indie films that are all ripping it off, like they're kind of missing out on like what it's ripping off of.
Yeah.
You know, like I can't count the amount of times I've met people who've watched the Royal Tenenbaums and haven't read Franny and Zoe, and I'm like, that is the same story. It's exactly the same story, and you're missing something from it. But with current artists who are currently alive, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like the art can be really good, but I don't have too much of an issue with like if a large group of people are like, yeah, the art was good, but you're kind of a jerk, so no.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense, because you're talking about perpetuating, like we're talking about behavior, right? What we're talking about is looks like we might have lost Scott. Maybe he'll jump back in.
One or two.
Yeah, but what we're talking about is we're talking about particular behaviors that we have. And as a society, the only way that we all get better is by making sure that everybody understands that certain behaviors are not okay.
Yeah.
And if there are no negative consequences for those behaviors, then those behaviors will perpetuate and continue. And that's the entire point of the justice system. That's the entire, it's a deterrent, right? And where certain things are not illegal, but they're not okay within a social contract, within like normal interactions with human beings, it's not illegal to just be mean and rude and be a jerk. Like that's not against the law, but the negative impact that you have on other people is going to leave you lonely. Like people are not required to be nice to you or hang out with you or, you know, or whatever. And so there's a deterrent to that is beneficial to society. And so if you look at this as like, you know, let's say people in Hollywood, they hate group X or whatever. And so you've got somebody who hates group X and they're vocal about it, you know, and all of a sudden everybody's like, nah, there's lots of people that could be making movies. Why do you get to make a movie? You know, like, let's just, you know, that becomes a deterrent. Like people need to think like, is that type of thought process and behavior going to impede my progress? And then maybe they think about it and they stop doing it, or they think about it and they think differently, you know, or whatever. So there's that. The other side of it that is interesting though, is if you take into account, like, what if a bad person produces work that has a net positive impact? What if the work is so good that it has a more positive impact than the individual has on
Yeah.
society? Then it becomes a really sticky issue, because you have people, let's say you've got people that are drawing incredible children's cartoons that are also in their free time supporting the pornography industry, which is traditionally, very anti-female, and it has become a big problem with like human trafficking and things like that. This is not a hypothetical situation. I'm speaking of something that has actually happened. Does that become a problem? Yes, it does. But does that make the work not beneficial?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a really sticky issue. And so that's why it keeps coming back to, stuff like this. Victor, to answer your question, an artist and the art, it's all subjective and relative at the same time. It's a paradox in its own right. I don't know that there's an answer, but I do think it's interesting to discuss it, because if you never articulate your gut reaction with other people and kind of bounce it as a sounding board and listen to kind of what's going on in other people's minds, I don't think you evolve into better thinking. And so it is interesting to kind of see, like, is there a line?
Yeah.
Should there be a legal line? Is there an ethical line? Is everybody's line different?
Yeah, and there's a great conundrum that always comes out of this conversation, which, by the way, never ends in a period at the end of the sentence. This is one of those topics like what is art, which is hilarious that Salazar brought it there. But one of the questions that's, I think, even more fundamental than what is art, which is another undefinable like art, which is what is beauty. And if beauty is like this eternal thing and truth is like a really important thing, then if something is true and beautiful, if the person who made it was like a mass murderer, does that make it any less true or beautiful? It's weird. It's a weird thing to kind of, or another scenario, like if there's a horrible human being who's a scientist who comes up with the cure for cancer, does that make that any less of a cure for cancer? It's like that conundrum of like, I mean, that's a scenario where I don't even think it's a hard pressed question of like, that would be a bigger benefit, bigger net positive than negative. But what if it was a really terrible person? They did all the worst things you can think of and cross off on your list. And that's where it gets really,
but that's where it becomes super problematic from a governance standpoint, because do you just take that thing and imprison that person?
Yeah.
Like we're going to take this thing you made and give it to everybody for the greater good, but you're not going to get to benefit from it.
And what's strange, like, this is just showing that this ties into reality too, is like, there's a lot of people in art history that were terrible people. There's a lot of people who outlasted World War II on the German side who ended up kind of being founding members of like NASA and scientists who created antibiotics that we're still using to this day, who were complicit in the Holocaust. I mean, there's like, and the government weighed that and was like, it's a net positive to have this person in a lab rather than at a trial. And there's scenarios like that throughout our history. It's a really interesting question as to whether that's right or not. And I think, like, for myself, like, I have certain solid lines, but I definitely see a lot of ambiguity in it. So it's a lot like what most of the time when Corey and I riff on a weird topic, it's just gray, and it might be black and white when you're 15. But the second you start kind of getting into the areas that are challenging, and I shouldn't say when you're 15, but I'm just saying for some people who haven't really gone through the path of like really asking those tough questions, it may not seem like a tough ethics thing, but it definitely is like a weird ethical conundrum.
You're not being ageist when you say that, though, because the human brain, this isn't like, get off my lawn, whippersnapper type thing. Like, the human brain doesn't fully develop until you're about 25 years old, and you don't even have the ability to see nuance until you begin approaching like 18, 19 years old. And so like everything is black and white, and gray areas and ambiguity cause a huge amount of cognitive dissonance when you're like 17 and younger. So you're not, it's not just, it's not just like, Gen Y or whatever we're supposed to be. Pre-millennial. I don't know. There's like pre-millennial, millennial, and post-millennial now. I'm tired of the millennial word. That gap is too big. But anyway, it's not an ageist thing. It's just the reality of neurological development is that when we are younger, all of us, we don't see nuance. Nuance becomes one of the reasons why we leave our parents' home and why we begin disagreeing with the older generation. And why things get better is because as we come into our own in our 20s, we start to see the way the world is and start to dislike certain things and actively rebel to change those things. This is a whole different topic. Yeah. Anyway, it is interesting because if you look at like, there have been horrible things in history that have actually caused a lot of really good things to happen. Like you look at like the expansion of the Roman Empire, that was a massive and horrible, bloody campaign. And yet it created a situation where most of Europe became literate. You look at like Napoleon. The guy was, a despot and power grabbing, whatever. But he was like the first one to like popularize studying Egypt. And so like Egyptology became a reality because of this warmonger, because he was only really good at like naval battles and not land battles. So as soon as it went to land, he was like, I'm going to go to Egypt for a little bit until this fight goes back to the ocean. And then when I went back to the ocean, he was back. Or no, it was the other way around. He was better on land than he was in water. But anyway,
I was gonna say he kind of met his end at water.
Yeah, it's the other way around. He's much better on land because he had a very interesting fighting style where he didn't have a supply train, and so most armies moved significantly slower than his, because he would. What's that?
No retreat.
Right. Burn your boats. No supply train. Raid and pillage as you go to continue, and if you don't win, there's nothing to eat. So, which is horrible. So anyway, all this horrible stuff but sometimes has a net positive in it. And so anyway, it's just an interesting thing.
So okay, I have an idea for like how we can wrap this, because I don't think we're going to wrap it anywhere other than just kind of bringing it to this day. So today, can you name like 2 artists that you may not even agree with? And I don't mean people who like have morally done something wrong, just people you disagree with that you love the work of. I can start it if you want.
I almost don't. This is the type of thing that I'm terrified of, because like somebody on Twitter is going to be like, Corey Kerr's a supporter of so and so or whatever.
I'll bring it up because I'm not going to bring up like people who are super contentious, but like for me, like a real problematic character, and yet I admire the hell out of him and I'd be geeked out to meet him, is Dave Sim. Dave Sim is a complete misogynist, and I don't mean that as a negative. Like he just is. He very openly is. And I've known and met people in the comics industry who rubbed elbows with him, and he sincerely seems to be that type of guy. But I love Cerebrus, and it's still one of the most important kind of indie comics that was ever made, and I still read it to this day. And then another cartoonist I'll mention that I love the work of, but I would completely probably not get along with at a bar, is like Frank Miller. Frank Miller politically is like on the polar opposite of my political spectrum, and yet I completely enjoy his work, and his political viewpoint doesn't affect the way that I read his work. Like I just kind of enjoy his work. And I think that's actually kind of a diversity that I think is cool in comics. And I think it would be a shame if like before reading Frank Miller, I just kind of discounted him. It was like, oh, he's a crazy, like, I don't believe in his political viewpoints. Because, there's a lot of friends I have on Facebook I don't agree with the political viewpoints of, but I love their work. And so
you and I don't agree politically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, I love your work. So it's like, I think it would be a shame to kind of let that sort of thing be a barrier to like checking out someone's work. But I also like, I think I might have a differing viewpoint if I found out either of those people like murdered someone or, so yeah, I don't know. That's two that come to mind for me,
Okay. I'll say Sean Gordon Murphy is probably one of mine. I love his work. He's a great writer. He's a great inker. He's an incredible illustrator. And I love a lot of what he does on Twitter and what he's done for comic book artists in general, because he has been like trying to get comic book illustrators to think like business people rather than like, I like Spider-Man, so the fact that I'm allowed to draw Spider-Man means that I shouldn't get a livable wage. He's like, no, that's bullcrap. You're doing incredible work. You should get paid for it. So think like a business person so that people treat you like a business person. So I really like that. But I believe in God. He is a staunch atheist. And so we differ like on a fundamental level at each of our cores. Our entire worldview and belief system is at odds. And so I'd say he's one.
But I'll take and love his work.
What's that?
But you still read and love his work.
Right. Exactly. And I find it eye-opening to me to be able to see how other people think about things.
Yeah.
It's not a toleration thing for me. It's an experience of education and learning and empathy to be able to say, actually, you've made a valid point. Like there's been some problematic things done in the name of religion, and things like that. So there's some of that. I'd also say I don't do drugs, and I never have, as a point of personal commitment. And you take somebody like Sean Crystal, who's another one that I love his art. His podcast was like life-changing for me. And a lot of his personal stories involve like heavy drug use. And so there's another one that I like ideologically and lifestyle wise, we would be on opposite ends of that spectrum, like almost complete opposites. Cause like I stay away from like caffeine as much as I possibly can, it's in stuff and stuff like that. But it's, and he's in favor of like mind altering, hallucinogens at times to help you get better with your art and stuff. But at the same time, I enjoy his work and I respect him as a person for a number of reasons, because he's a phenomenal individual, super hardworking. So those are my two, without choosing anybody where Twitter's going to flame me.
God, anybody come to mind?
It's hard for me because honestly, I don't really follow the personal lives of like a lot of artists. But I could kind of echo what Corey said. There's a lot of, I've never used drugs either. There's a lot of people that say that, certain drugs can influence you creatively and everything. I don't necessarily agree with that, at least for me, but I don't know. There's just no one in particular. I don't know. Sorry, I
feel like the odd man out because I used a bit of drugs.
Yeah, I try not to follow people's personal life so much.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't tell you, like, as far as like actors, like whatever, like all the tabloid stuff and everything that goes on, I don't follow any of that stuff. It just, if somebody's good in a movie, all right, or some of it does seep through and then I'm like, oh really? Wow, that's unfortunate. I'm not sure if I have the same opinion of that person anymore, but I can't think of anyone in particular. I guess you could say like Walt Disney, but I've heard conflicting things about Disney. I've heard the stuff that Corey was talking about, and then I've heard other people say that no, that's not the case. So I don't know.
It's hard to say because he's a product of his era,
right?
And two, he's the face of a company that actively seeks to whitewash everything that they do.
Right.
So anyway,
yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
It's fascinating because like there's, I mean, like even within that, like you were mentioning about Warner Brothers and stuff. If the people watching this want to go down a rabbit hole, look up World War II Bugs Bunny cartoons and be horrified.
Yeah.
Because there's Bugs Bunny just straight up murdering people.
Yeah.
Yep.
Murdering really racist depictions of people.
Yeah, and they don't like bounce back. It's not cartoony. But anyhow, but like so I think there's
Bugs Bunny's mine then, because I love Bugs Bunny, but
all right.
The purpose for me bringing that up was just to kind of remind people like there's nuance too to like checking out art now, and I wanted to be clear that like our goal in having this conversation wasn't to be like don't check out divergent ideas or people who kind of differ in their opinions and stuff. I think us even just doing the show every week is a perfect example. We don't always agree, but at the same time, you know, we're not going to let that be a barrier to like creating art or like respecting each other, you know. But at you know, like I do think it's important to know a little bit about people. I don't think you need to know too much, but I definitely think, you know, like we've even talked about like the tough parts with Stan Lee before, where it's like it's a mixed bag where I have this respect and admiration for Stan Lee that I grew up with. And then I have, you know, all the stories that I read from Kirby, who I admire the hell out of, and from other people who work for Marvel who tell a completely different narrative of Stan Lee. So there's two Stan Lees, you know.
Will Eisner's a much better hero than Stan Lee, but
I agree with that. but my point is, like, you know, I think it's important to know both Stan Lees, and like, you know, and at the same time, it doesn't necessarily minimize like the importance of the work he did, you know. So
yeah. So interesting. There's interesting discussions going on as well. I do want to say this, and I think this is part of this discussion because everybody in the chat started talking about drugs.
Yeah, drugs.
just because
drugs. I don't do drugs now. I just did when I was younger.
But just because I behave a specific way and believe a certain way, that's what I'm doing. And I would be nervous if people based their decisions based on what I was doing or felt like I was judging them harshly because they do something different than me. I think that's the point. There was somebody that in my early 20s said something that has always stuck with me. If two people are exactly the same, one of them is not necessary. And I think like as a society, we need people that are different so that we can get outside of our own heads and stop being so self-centered and narcissistic. And given that, if you do come across something from me or somebody else that you are like, hey, I really like that, I'm going to adopt that. Like, do it. There's nothing wrong with that either. You know, I mean, if you want to emulate, you know, good things that you see in other people, that's awesome. So anyway, interesting topic.
Yeah.
What's that?
Way too good of a can of worms we cracked open there.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that there's really an end to it ever. It seems like the community would really enjoy a discussion on drugs, though, based on the last. Everybody's weighing in on whether they have had or currently do use drugs.
Yeah, so. And I want to say you just and that's my own personal, and I drink. So I mean, if you consider alcohol a drug, then yeah, I guess I take drugs. But but like I'm not against legalization of like marijuana, but it's just not for me. I mean, to me, I'm very much like there's things I want to do and I'm very productive, and I think that would definitely slow me down. So that's one of the reasons. But that's up to whoever, and the drugs that speed you up are definitely more dangerous. So I don't want to do that either. So yeah, I mean it's kind of a, that's your own choice. I'm not making any kind of a judgment call.
Don't worry, because soon we will all be cyborgs that are algorithmically driven by the superorganism manipulators, so they'll decide how we feel anyway. So all of this discussion will become moot. It's like a cow's opinion. All right, so Scott, where can we find your stuff?
Well, right now, for the next 4 days, 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 23 seconds and counting, you can get the Comic Maker Toolkit at Design Cuts. You just go to Design Cuts, and I'm assuming that's still somewhere up in the top, if not where it is right now. It's the #1 selling product, which is pretty awesome.
Great.
And other than that, you can find me at circworks.com or Circworks on YouTube.
Cool. Josh, where can we find your stuff?
Go to joshuakimball.com, or if you want a shortcut to my comic, just go to quarterlystories.com, and it'll take you to the landing page on there that has my graphic novel Quarterly Stories. You can also check out my comic on your Android or iOS device. It reads a lot better. If you go to topis.io and search for Quarterly Stories there, and while you're there, also add it to your library and subscribe to it, because that helps new people kind of discover my comic about faith and mental illness that I handwrite, hand letter, hand draw, and then hand to you hopefully someday in print. But until then, it's there at joshuakimball.com. So yeah.
All right, cool. And you can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. You are currently on my channel. So do me a huge favor before everybody leaves. Hit the thumbs up button, because that helps with the algorithm. And then leave, you guys have been awesome in the chats. Leave a quick comment on the video itself. Both of those things are good. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And if you would like to be notified when I go live or when I post a new video, then you can hit the bell. And sometimes YouTube will show you that I go live, and sometimes they won't for some reason. And everything else can be found on my website at CoreyKerr.com. And if you would like to do what we are doing currently, and you would like to try to use StreamYard, we had somebody sign up through us, and so we got a month free, which is awesome. Then you can go to CoreyKerr.com/48HR. And at the top of the page, there's a little affiliate link talking about StreamYard. Click on that, try it out for free. If you like it and pay for it, then we get a little kickback. If you don't like it, then keep using it for free or don't use it or whatever. Anyway, it doesn't cost you anything to click the link.
Well, that must have just kicked in when we were live, because the logo's not up there.
I noticed that. Too. I don't know. It's a weird thing. Anyway, I still have some issues with StreamYard, but ultimately it is, if you're going for ease of use, I would say it's like best in class for ease of use. If you're looking for like image quality and stuff, they're still working on that. But anyway, that's where we are. Let me see. Check the chat before I go. YouTube is weird that way for sure. And Kayla caught my joke, so that's awesome. We will catch you guys on Wednesday. So come back on Wednesday. And if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, leave that in the comments. We'll see you later.